Hello,
We're back again.
he's Shabazz,
He's Pete Marshall.
and this is cripchat
UK. Sorry, I'll do that again. And this is cripchat UK.
And today we're with the Baroness of Eaglescliff, who died in Game of Thrones in season 3.
Really? I've never watched Game of Thrones. Was it really a Baroness of Eaglescliff?
I have no idea, but honestly,
okay.
that title sounds incredibly like Game of Thrones.
It is a bit, isn't it? It's a bit. I've got my new passport through recently, and apparently I'm Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson, Baroness of Eaglescliff.
That sounds like an almost Spanish level of length of name. That's
Tanni, or you is totally fine.
Yeah. So have you got a terrible blue passport then?
I've got a new blue passport. I have, with a lockdown haircut.
Oh right.
And yeah, it's not a good haircut. It's slightly sort of, well, I've hacked into it. So I've got that for 10 years. So yeah, maybe by the end of it, I'll actually in real life. I guess what's really good, if I ever get to fly again, and I come off a really long haul flight and I look really bad, I will actually look like my passport photo.
Yeah. What do you think about the new passports? Do you think they're good or what?
I wasn't desperate to go back to a blue one, so I think there's a massive cost to that. Yeah. I think what's really important for me is having a British passport, in that it gives you, I guess, I feel safe. Actually, I'm very fortunate to have a British passport to be able to travel the world with.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do you want to introduce kind of what you've been doing lately and kind of your history for anyone who doesn't know it?
Yeah. So I'm Tanni Grey-Thompson. I was a Paralympic athlete. I competed at 5 games. I won 16 Paralympic medals. And for the last 10 years, I've been in the House of Lords as a crossbench peer, which means I'm not affiliated to any political party. And I work on a whole range of stuff, disability rights, women's issues, physical activity, welfare reform and education. And that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah, so could we begin by asking you about the bill you're working on at the moment, specifically about the 2 amendments that you're working on?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm working on domestic abuse legislation, and it's really to ensure that disabled people are protected within domestic abuse legislation. And there's been a big debate about whether that's the right place to have it. But actually, if you're being abused in a domestic setting, whether you're disabled or non-disabled, the domestic abuse legislation is the place to have that. And I think some of the stuff that we want to get across is around sort of carers and support. And you know, it's a very intimate relationship, having a carer.
Definitely is.
You know, and sort of there's a language, you know, which is, you know, we're going to get on to talk about is, you know, normally intimate relationship would mean a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole debate about whether you could be with a partner in a house and whether you're in a sexual relationship or intimate. But to me, it's really important that we protect protections given to disabled people, because what we do know, it's very hard for a disabled person to raise issues of domestic abuse, whether it's, you know, your ability as a parent will be called into account. You know, there's loads of levels. It's physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse. And so, yeah, we're working on that. So it's a chance to, I think, just get to people to just listen and to understand about actually life as a disabled person, because the voice of disabled people is completely lost at the minute in everything, you know.
I would say, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's always disability is going to get done next year, and it never is. So it's like, come on, you know, we need to just talk about it. And
I was going to say that anybody who has personal care, like such as myself, is in an intimate relationship with the carer, because you're sharing intimate details about yourself, you know. So
and arguably a much more intimate relationship than, say, I have with my husband, because you're so reliant on what time that person comes, if they come, getting help, whatever it is that you need help with.
Yeah.
That's way more intimate than a sexual, or can be way more intimate.
Yeah.
And yeah, so no, we've got to, we're working really hard to change this. So, you know, it's Jane Campbell, who's like amazing, is leading on the amendments now, and she's got some fantastic speeches to which hopefully I can add to get people to think differently. And
does it go as far as you would like it to go?
No, it doesn't. But it really does with legislation, to be honest.
Yeah.
So there's so much more in terms of carers' defence, which I don't think will be successful at the next stage, where this is where a person in a caring position will say they did something which might be medicating or non-medicating or keeping someone at home because it's in that person's best interest. And this is quite a complicated one to go into as well. But in my feeling is, in too many instances, the carer's defence has been used to hide abuse and to cover it up.
I mean, I'll just say there's it was Disability Day of Mourning, kind of, which isn't really done in the UK, but this kind of leads into this, because one of the kind of, even if you look at a lot of the academic research around infanticide and around kind of and around this issue around disability, it is like, it's even a fairly standard thing in law cases for like children who have got killed by parents or by others to kind of who are disabled, to kind of then go, well, it was in this person's best interest. And so I would argue that it's that, honestly, in some ways I kind of get why it's, you know, generally we are a society that gives parents a great deal of leeway in terms of they have a right to raise children the way they want to, but like there is places that like actually that starts leading into some really dark territory, and how we tell, and honestly there's not enough work is done in terms of like what are the red flags where you're
I mean, and we see it in terms of, you know, assisted suicide is something else which is quite contentious whether you're for or against it. But, you know, there's things in there where the attitude towards disabled people about our lives is so bad that, you know, it's like people think, oh, you're better off dead. I mean, I actually had someone, I mean, I've had it said to me several times, well, if I was like you, I'd kill myself. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know what that says about your life, but, you know.
Well, what's quite interesting in
their life,
kind of like that, yeah, they think their life is like really good, and they think my life's really bad, and you go, that's not my view of my life and your life, let alone anything. You know, yeah. So, you know, I haven't yet said it because it's not appropriate to be flippant. It's like, no, actually, if my life is like yours, I'd kill myself. You can't, you know. So, yeah. But it's all that thing that we must all be miserable and unhappy and sad and have no life and not worth it. And so, you know, all this. I mean, all the stuff around, you know, sport, and 2012 was an amazing Games, absolutely incredible. As a Paralympics, fab. It will be the best Paralympics for a long time to come. But I'm really tired of people standing up saying 2012 changed the world for disabled people.
It really fucking didn't.
It didn't. No, but that's the view. So from a non-disabled person, and it's a bit weird because I'm a Paralympian, and it's fine to feel lovely and warm and cuddly about Paralympians doing well, but you just start going, disability hate crime against children, compulsory do not resuscitate orders. Yeah. Fact, we still can't get on a train, even though we were promised in the mid-90s. It's like, do I really have to list all these things about why 2012 didn't change the world before you listen? So, yeah, I think lockdown's made me a bit stop. There's always a balance in terms of how you put things across. But I think what lockdown's done is, like, I'm not willing just to sit and go, I'm going to explain to you a bit more gently. I think time for gentle stuff in lots of areas is over and done, you know, but yeah, we'll see how we come out of it.
I think one of the legacies of the 2012 Olympics has been, and this has it all for me, is the last leg. You know, that's the only thing people remember from the 2012 Olympics, really. It's the TV show, the last leg.
And I think the hashtag "Is it okay?" is really good, because people need to be able to ask questions, you know, and you know, they can do it in quite a frivolous way, the fun way, quite a serious way. You know, actually, it's important to be able to have those discussions to educate. I don't know. I mean, I think it's one of those things that people think it's just like frivolous. It's okay to say it. But if anyone stood up and said 2012 changed the world and there's no racism anymore, there's no misogyny anymore, somebody would go, you'd think most people wouldn't. But what is it about disability that makes people think it's okay to say that? I've no idea. I wish I could get to the bottom of it.
I mean, to introduce another theme into all of this, like one of the things we were curious about is kind of how disabled people's organizations can kind of input into legislation to kind of, because in terms of, I think, winning some more like substantive victories, at some level things have to be kind of put into legislation. And so I think especially with the domestic abuse bill, there have been two organizations. There have been Sisters of Frida who've been putting forward some stuff, and Stay Safe East. Yeah. So kind of maybe Lady Jane Campbell has been more kind of more directly their kind of link. But kind of, could you tell us like how they've like who contacted each other first? Like what has the relationship been?
Yeah. So on this particular bill, I've had a lot of contact with Stay Safe East, which goes back nearly a year, I think, in terms of them getting in touch with me saying, okay, we've got some amendments and this is the data we've got. What works in the Lords is not just talking about the detail of the legislation, but how it impacts people. And they've been able to provide case studies and speak to people, and that's incredibly important. Sisters of Frida, I've been involved with them on other things, and so for me it's really important that as a disabled person I have a voice, but it doesn't mean to say it's the correct voice. And it's really important for me to go out and find other disabled people and DPOs to speak to, not charities or organisations that run for or on behalf of disabled people, because then it goes to that lens and the filter. And one of the things we've seen with COVID, there's been loads of things talking about the impact on people with learning disabilities, but actually getting somebody with a learning disability on to talk about it, not a parent of someone or a relation, or and there has been a bit of a breakthrough in terms of I think it was last week, there was a person with a learning disability talking about it. It's like, yes, it's a tiny step. So yeah, that voice, because whatever legislation you're working on, you have to talk to people who are working in it day in, day out. I am not working in domestic abuse day in, day out. That's not how the Lords works. I work in physical activity day in, day out, and can bring that to the chamber. But for me, it's really important to have those connections and just keep talking to people, because they're it's the real life stuff is what's important.
So is there a difference between how kind of this works in the Commons versus the Lords? And B, kind of who made the first kind of outreach? Do you basically decide who you personally want to work with? But let's say Lady Jane Campbell wanted to kind of take a more, like, would you kind of pass it on to her? Like, It
can be. So, in the original part of the domestic abuse, my name was on the amendments. And then actually there was something that happened. So the way the timetable happened, I couldn't speak on that particular day. So Jane said she'd speak on that amendment. And this happens, an amount of times. And I had other names on the amendments. What's happened now actually is that Jane is the first name on the amendments, because actually, in terms of the stuff that we're arguing for, she has a stronger case to be on the amendment first than me, because she has personal support workers. And so, so what you try and do, you can have 4 names on an amendment and you try and bring people in that will offer different things. So what you try and do is you try and get cross-party support. And then you try and get people who know what they're talking about on it. So the way the Commons and the Lords does work slightly differently, because, we do detail, and none of our stuff, or very little of our stuff, is time guillotines in terms of, we have a number of days that a bill will be debated over, but we can kind of pick and choose how that works out. So I always say, like with the Lords, our job is to say to the Commons, whatever government's there, Our job is to say, do you want to have another think about it? We're the experts in this. This is what we've sort of had a look at, and we think you can do better. Now they can listen or not listen, and it can go back and forth. It's called ping pong. But the Lords is there to bring expertise. You know, so what we do, you know, would I go into a debate on some beekeeping? No, because I know nothing about beekeeping. But we've got about 10 peers that keep bees. So actually they're the people you want to be debating beekeeping. So there is quite a distinct role between the Lords and the Commons in terms of what we do. But for me, it's like, I think there's some stuff that I would say I'm an expert in, but you still need to talk to people outside to check whether you're in the right place. And there's stuff that I'm not, but I'm interested in. And then it's my job to find the experts.
I mean, I wonder what your kind of opinion would be on this, because Sisters of Freda put forward, I think, many of the same amendments in the Commons. I think they put forward 10, and all of them got voted down. And now it's coming to the Lords, and now you've kind of kept two of them, or maybe Stay Safe East kind of directed, like. But I'm kind of wondering, kind of what the kind of why there was this disconnect between the two bodies, and kind of how,
no, it's not a disconnect between the bodies. It's what chance you've got the amendments through. So and this is the bit of politics that is hard, because you have to look at the numbers in the Commons. So it depends whether it starts their end or our end first, but it's sometimes easier when it starts in the Commons, because you look at the numbers that vote, and you look at the way the speeches go, and then you have to make a judgment call about what's the best chance of getting something through. And you've got to try and, so what happens is, through second reading and committee stage, you get a feel for the chamber. You don't tend to vote until report stage, but by then, so this is hard, because you go, there's stuff that I would have loved to table at report, but it will get nowhere, it will get no support, and if I have a vote, it will massively lose. And that takes up a period of time. So we're allocated a number of days. That could take up 5 hours of debate, which is then lost to other stuff which comes later in the bill, which gives you a better chance of getting through. So you're constantly trying to weigh up those things. And there are amendments that I take which you think may or may not, but that's the hard bit, is trying to make that decision about whether it will get through, because you might so in welfare reform or something, you might win a vote in the Lords, but if it gets massively overturned in the Commons, it's not going to come back to us again, or it's so it's that's the hardest bit about politics.
They've got like something called, I don't know if I've got the name right, but in the Commons they've got financial privilege or something like that. So they can overturn anything, essentially.
I mean, they're very careful how they use that generally, because basically they could slap that on any bill, because there's a financial implication to every bill. They don't do it often, because if they did it often, then it just annoys the Lords. So there is this sort of it's kind of a balance. I don't even know if balance of power is the right word. I mean,
unwritten constitution is what, anyway.
So, you know, there are things we can send back 3 times. There's things we can send back till we're bored. And at certain point, you have to take this judgment call. It's not good for the government if they massively lose a vote in the Lords. It's not great if it goes back to them, you know. So they're making judgment calls the whole time as well. And whether people like the Lords or not, in terms of, you know, being nominated, not elected, that there are advantages. You know, that I have no political career. I can't go anywhere. I'm not trying to be a minister. There's nothing else for me to do apart from trying to improve legislation. They can't threaten to get rid of us or deselect us. So they can't say, well, if you vote this way, you know, you're all right or you're not all right in your next election. So it is quite hard to explain all that. So the unwritten constitution, it's quite hard to explain how that works until you've been there and you witness it. And I suppose you see reality.
And I suppose there's an interesting thing. If you look right now at kind of what's happening to the Republican Party, then to a very significant extent, they're being driven by the base. And so whichever house they're in, they're still being driven by the same political pressures. Whereas I suppose actually, if you think about kind of the Lords versus the Commons, they have entirely different pressures in terms of time, in terms of finances, in terms of like, they don't have to get voted in. It doesn't matter what kind of a base or a constituency thinks of their opinions, which I suppose is both good and bad in this sense. So
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the best advice I got when I went to the Lords was don't speak in a debate that you don't know what you're talking about, which, you know, I mean, it sounds a bit daft when you say it, but, you know, and the thing I think that was made very clear when I went there, the thing that got you there is what you're expected to remain an expert in. And an opinion, you know, I could think I'm an expert and someone might disagree with my opinion. That's sort of something slightly different. And then you're expected over time to take on more subject areas. And that's just, you know, what is meant to be. So what they don't want. So the Commons the debates are can be a bit more generic. Ours can be a bit heavier on detail. But that's where the balance between the two chambers sort of comes into being. And, you know, our end is actually, it's very polite. I would say it's very grown-up politics. You know, if someone disagrees with you, they'll tell you, but they're generally pretty polite in how they do it. And, you know, they don't shout at you, and you can have what I think the Lords can do. You know, people can come into a debate, listen, say one thing, and then say, actually, do you know what? I've listened to everyone else, and this is kind of what I now think. So I think that's really important, because like my views on stuff change over time, and some do, some don't. Actually having that ability to say what I thought a year ago is not what I think now, because I've put more information in the mix, and I think that's quite important in politics.
This is why spaces like this, our podcast, is a good place, because we want to be able to have these kind of discussions with people like yourself without, you know, television pressures or time pressures or anything like that, you know. So it's good for, you know, I always like to say the disabled community and beyond, you know. It's like, our podcast isn't just for the disabled community. We're disabled, but we're other things besides, you know.
Yeah.
And disability is not who we are, it's part of who we are. So, you know, that's only one aspect. And to that end, I wanted to ask you a question, was like, I'll put it this way. What would be your advice and stuff like to get shit done in terms of from the pavement to the penthouse where you are, in terms of the political structure? How do we close that gap? Do you get one?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so many things, because it's really easy to get involved in local politics, but that's quite hard to do. And then, you know, we have lots of debates about, you know, access to funding to help disabled people get into politics. Yeah. You know, actually, you know, going campaigning, knocking door to door is pretty hard to do. Whoever you are, actually, it's fairly miserable, whoever you are. Yeah. But, you know, if
as a person who's done it, yes.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that voice of disabled people is really important, because it's got to be everywhere. I mean, there's actually a reasonable number of disabled people in the Lords. That's because we're nominated, not elected. And you know, with somebody like me or someone like Jane Campbell, I don't know whether we would get elected or not, because my political views are quite mixed. They don't really easily fit within a political party, and we don't have a system where it's that easy to be an independent, to stand. And, you know, the cost of stand campaign. So, you know, I would, one of the first things I would do would be, you know, we have a Minister of Disabled People who's not sitting in the Department of Work and Pensions, who's sitting, you know, maybe cross-departmentally, that's the word, because actually issues of disability go across everything. Yeah. So I think that'd be good. I mean, we always talk about joined up politics, but that never's going to work.
I mean, I'll just ask you a question. How, like, I mean, I suppose there's a very specific question, which is how effective has Justin Tomlinson been? Because given all of the disability-related stories, I've actually, you know, even you just want to go from a very like naive, like how many times have you seen his name mentioned in the newspaper around things like DNRs? I haven't seen him, like, he hasn't been asked for quotes for most of these things, you know. You know, he's, you know, so that's, and I suppose there is a deeper question, which is, I think in some ways disability ministers, but they haven't been as useful as, like, you have a few that have been very useful, and then you have many of them that kind of have not. So I mean, yeah.
So I think there's like quite a few things in that. So there's the one bit about actually things like DNRs haven't particularly got a lot of media traction. And then actually, do the media even know who to go to? There's a massive question about actually how much power do ministers have? And you like to think they have loads, but actually, depending which department in, who they are, what the government manifesto is, they have a different amount of power. And then, you know, the role of the minister is kind of, in everything, is to say no, I think. So it's what we kind of probably need, and I hate the word champion, or I can't stand the word champion, but you need someone who's a disability champion, who kind of fighting it from a different angle, because, you know, in like welfare reform, it's the Lord's minister keeps saying, no, you can't change, you can't give this, you can't give more money to this. You know, that's what I mean. Their role is to say no to amendments, and then sometimes you can get them to shift on it. So it's, and I lost, I'm not sure, I don't think I even voted on it, but I didn't get a lot of traction on an amendment I had in welfare reform, which was to say, okay, instead of saying you've got to prove your level of impairment to figure out how much money you've got, can we just shift it all around and think, if we give this much money to someone, what can they do with it? Now, that doesn't fit into a really nice system or a scheme or an assessment process or anything like that. But for me, it's, and I did a Newsnight interview, and I didn't say it terribly well, but it's where disability and sickness are linked together. And you can be sick and not disabled, not sick, or you can be sick and disabled. But it all gets swept up in this, oh, disabilities, it's all a bit sad and tragic. So for me, and I don't know the answer to how we shift that around to actually talk about how disabled people can contribute to society, instead of trying to find loads of ways to exclude them from contributing to society. I mean, that's kind of a bit of a mission for, I don't know however long I've got left in politics, is that. So yeah, I think there's a whole thing on just ministers. You know, I mean, I've been to ministers from all departments thinking they're going to change the world, and then you actually go, quite hard to, really. It's
It's because when I was growing up, you were like the go-to person, you know, for the media. You know, like when anything was happening on disability, it was like, ask Tanni. But I used to think, what if she doesn't fucking care? You know what?
Yeah.
Why do you want to go to this one disabled person who's got their own lives to live and whatever else? You know, I always used to feel sorry for people like you as like the go-to person, because I get treated like that as well, as the go-to got be Asian person, you know, disabled Asian person. So I fucking hate that, you know. So I feel for you.
So what I've been trying to do for about the last 30 years is, when I get a call from the media saying, can you come and talk about this? I don't know anything about it. So, you know, part of it's trying to build my network. So you know, the European Space Agency announcement the other week where they may send a disabled person into space. And I had someone ring me going, oh, isn't this amazing? Like, well, I can't get on the Northern Line. Sorry, I really cannot get excited, because actually when you look at who they might send, it's someone with a fused ankle. You know, that's who they're going to send.
We did a podcast on it, and we went through the exact things, and it was not impressive, honestly.
No, and then I sort of, you know, they've gone to the International Paralympic Committee, and I was like, why are you going there? Well, the reason you're going there, I'm actually making a speech on this later today. They're going there because actually the lack of access to STEM subjects and the lack of disabled people that probably work in the space industry, and you can't, if you were looking for someone to go into space, there are lots of organisations you'd go to. But if you're looking for a disabled person, their lack of representation means you can't go there. So as much as I kicked off about going to the IPC, there is an American amputee athlete called Jerome Singleton who has degrees in physics, maths and engineering, who's worked at NASA and CERN. So, but you know, that's like the Paralympics is not the answer to everything. And something I'm getting really frustrated about at the moment is that para is being used to talk about para sport, para athletes, para this, para that. It's being used to replace the word disabled. And somebody said, oh, we could have a paranaut. No, you'd have an astronaut who's a disabled person. And the reason I'm getting kind of frustrated with it is because anybody who does sport as a disabled person will be called a para athlete. That could be a 12-year-old who's not very good and doesn't want to train and doesn't like it. And it could be someone who's an elite athlete who goes to the Paralympics. More importantly, if we replace, disabled with para, it breaks the connection of disability and it breaks the connection of discrimination. And it means nothing has to change in terms of change in access, physical access, attitudinal access, because para is lovely and warm and cuddly.
Yeah.
And say it, own it, and then there's something that's got to be done about it. But para's just, and I get why they've done it, but I think it's a retrograde step in terms of fighting for equality.
From my reading, I'll go through this very, very quickly, but it seemed to, most of the reason they seem to want the paranauts was actually so they could get a lot more scientists and get a lot of kind of disabled scientists and kind of ground control and things like that, which in some ways, I think ended up hiding. So I think that was actually a more interesting story in the sense that actually that is actually available to more people, but equally it's a lot less sexy as a topic. So,
do you know what, a Paralympian is not the answer to everything.
No.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a real life example of that. When you're talking about the word and stuff, is the example is the DLA, right? Disabled Living Allowance, and the name was changed to PIP, for example. So it's getting rid of the word disabled out of that,
Yeah,
So
I wrote a speech on that.
Right? Pardon?
I've got a speech somewhere which I wrote about that personal independence payment. It sounds amazing because what it sounds like is what I was talking about. It sounds like we're going to give you money to be independent.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that. So yeah, I've got a speech from 2012 which covers exactly that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about there's an entire discussion around kind of the political disabled person and the note and as soon as you start getting it's very easy to get, and again, as a member of the House of Lords, it's probably slightly different for you, but especially but if you get yourself into a position of kind of prominence and you're disabled, then there's kind of iconic status. And then as soon as you start talking about politics and go, actually, Pip is terrible or something, then immediately that puts you into a very different category in terms of what programs are interested in, that kind of, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because, by sort of going into politics, and the Lords is, it's not as, public as the Commons or any other bit like that, but some good and bad comes with that. So as much as, a lot of people go, oh, that's really good that you're involved in politics, there's a lot of hate that comes with that as well, and some of the things that I've worked on, some of the, I've had emails saying, we know where you live, watch your back, some really, really far more unpleasant emails than that. It's having an opinion and raising your head above the parapet comes with issues, and yeah, it's not always as good. So the thing is, I think I was always going to end up in politics somewhere because as a child I actually wanted to be a lawyer, and then
you did it at university, didn't you?
I did politics, so I went to Loughborough and they didn't do a law degree. So but all my plan always was from 18 was that I was going to do, I was going to do history or politics degree. I was going to do law conversion and become a lawyer. So I was going to end up somewhere in, and a lot of that was, arguing. I've got a lot of opinion. I've got opinion on everything, but not every opinion should be public. I think that's really important. But, so I think it's because I care and I want to change things. And I had a very, I guess, privileged upbringing in terms of education, in that I went, because of my impairment, because I was born with spinal bifida, I could walk a bit when I was young, so I started off in mainstream school, and then my parents threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to mainstream high school. So I got into mainstream school, and education gave me A levels in university and all those other things. So that's really cool. So I think for me, that's a lot of where I come from, is just disabled people deserve to have same opportunities, not just constantly be told they're a waste of space or they're a drain on society or you can't do that. I'm just slightly over. Lockdown's been interesting. My resilience for dealing with people who are idiots has gone. So what I think I used to be really good at doing was, when someone was really patronising to me, I was quite good at taking a breath and having a chat with them and just trying, and it's gone. I'm just, I'm not dealing with it. And I will still try and be polite, but and I said this, I get treated four ways. One is an ex-athlete, which is generally quite nice. As a parliamentarian, people either like me or hate me, not much in the middle. And then as a disabled woman is where I experience my most discrimination and the most challenge in my life. And for me, I think it's fascinating that, well, I don't know if anyone else does, but the fact I'm able to see from those three different perspectives. So I would have to say most of my friends who are disabled get treated just like a disabled person all the time, and they deal with rubbish day in, day out. I get to see it from different bits, which for me is quite useful.
Do you ever wish you ran for Parliament?
No. I don't, because my political views are just quite complicated. So I
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think probably most people's are. I don't know. I'm a bit left, I'm a bit right, depending, depending what the issue is, really. So I've never found a party that I could say 90% of that I agree with.
Yeah.
And so for me as well, I struggle a bit with party politics as well. I'm kind of issue led. So that comes back to my sort of where I sit.
Yeah.
And there are some issues that I have to go, what do I think about that? I don't know. I'm not very good at being told what to do or what I should think. Yeah. And I think that's why I've struggled with party politics, because depending who the leader is and depending what the manifesto is, you're then told what you're meant to think on things. And I don't know, as much as I've got an opinion on everything, not everything's balanced. And there's some things I just go, I don't know. Yeah. So
what do you wish that the disabled community could do what could we do more to change stuff ourselves, from the ground up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big bit about being a resource for people who work in disability rights, because sometimes being in the Lords can feel really lonely. I'm not there to have mates or make friends, and there's people I know, but I'm not there to hang out. And being a crossbencher can be quite hard because you can't go and sit with I'm not there to have mates. It's not school. So I think being a resource to people who work in areas is really important, because we need help and support. So when I was doing welfare reform, there was a group of disability rights campaigners who were amazing. They watched every single minute of the debate, and they listened to what people said, and they were emailing me links or things to say or things to think about. And then it was amazing, because I didn't feel kind of alone, and that was the first big bit of legislation I did, so that's really hard as well. So that's important, the view. And I watched the program that was on BBC the other week, and actually Jane Campbell was in it, and it was about, and Liz Carr, people stopped the buses on Westminster Bridge, and that coming together of disabled people. I got really emotional, because how hard it was to get that number of disabled people together in one place. And actually that's not changed, because somebody said to me, it's like, well, why don't disabled people protest in Westminster? I'm like, you can get one wheelchair user per bus. Do you have any idea how long it would take for us all to get into London? So it's for me, it's the disabled people's organisations that are really important. How we get that together again, I mean, it's really, really important.
I mean, this is going to be a slightly, this is kind of, and again, I don't know to what degree this is entirely separate from the House of Lords, the House of Commons, but I know one of the massively problematic bits in terms of thinking about the structure of how policy gets decided is, for example, if we're talking about kind of abuse in care homes, then if you look at kind of the group if you look at like the all-party parliamentary group on autism, then that kind of one of the places that had a massive scandal was the National Autistic Society. Now it's kind of a problematic thing that basically the National Autistic Society basically run that all-party parliamentary group. And in the end, I don't think that that's a particularly unique situation in terms of if you look at who actually goes to these places and goes to the committees. You know, I suspect mental health, you will have very few people in those committees who disagree with mind on, you know, a massive range of topics. You know, if you went to a whole number of these, you would probably find that like one or two charities / organizations kind of, and honestly, this becomes a massively problematic issue in the sense of like, I mean, to take abuse in care homes, for example, one of the issues around that is that given current funding constraints, it is almost impossible to get 10 years worth of funding, anything. So if you are basically name your charity, but basically name your organization, honestly, a very easy way of fixing that is to run a care home, get some money in, yada yada yada. That, you know, that is a long-term kind of investment. And in the end, if we're thinking about hard political reforms that make abuse in care homes a lot harder, almost all of them make it a lot more expensive to run a care home and make it a lot less profitable. So you end up with this situation where you have not-for-profit organizations like that basically like run some fairly dense political kind of infrastructure, at the same time having like kind of a conflict of interest, not conflict of interest like in terms of how could that be worked through in terms of like, because who gets invited is kind of whose opinion matters in these senses.
Yeah, so something like the APPGs, all party parliamentary groups, they don't have any actual political power within Parliament. So they're there really, that what they're meant to be for is to educate peers and MPs about issues. And so, you know, there are, you know, a number that are run by different organisations, charities, things like that. And then they do have influence over debates or not about what is discussed at the APPG, and some carry out investigations and some can, you know, there's lots of different things. The work in terms of the investigatory stuff is through select committees and through the chamber. So what the parliamentary system tried to do more recently was just cut down the number of APPGs, because there's loads, you know, pretty much anything you could ever think of a subject, there's an APPG on it. So and there's also been some really quite, I think, important changes in terms of access to parliamentary passes for people who work on APPGs. So in the past, if you were an organisation that ran the secretariat for an APPG, you could get a pass to wander around the building and ultimately, you know, chat to people, influence. That stopped. Lobbying, that's the word I was looking for, thank you. So, you know, there's been, you know, that's been looked at, and that's not to say it doesn't need more. But I think there's a whole debate on what APPGs. Some organisations will, you know, go, oh, the APPGs made. Actually, the reality is most peers and MPs don't have time to go to all the APPGs they're interested in because they're doing other things. So I mean, I think that needs looking at.
Who gets invited to the select committees though? How does that get decided? Like who, like, because again, in some ways, like I think in some ways, like the most public way that an opinion gets kind of accepted by is going in front of a parliamentary select committee. And I'm not sure when the last time like someone went in front of those places who basically their entire legitimacy was gained through a DPO. Like,
yes. So with that, so I sit on a sport and recreation select committee, and for that there's an open application process. So it's a Lord's one. So any peer can apply, and you go through like a job application, and there's a SIF panel, and they decide. And so what they do with that is they try and balance knowledge, experience. They like to have someone who sits on it who's not an expert, who can ask the question, because sometimes if you know where the bodies are buried, it's quite hard to ask the questions. So they want someone to ask the daft questions, because and I've been in this position where you ask a question. I'm not on a select committee with something else, where someone goes, oh, well, you know that. Yeah, no, you're just avoiding answering the question. So you need people who can ask lots of different questions. So the process for that's one thing. And then who gets invited, that's usually the select committee. Certainly my experience is sitting on this, the select committee who decide. But then if the voice of disabled people doesn't exist in the right places, and, it's the big charities for disabled people, not the DPOs, then, but it is the responsibility of the clerk and the chair to look beyond the usual suspects and to look beyond the usual questions and to challenge. And so much as then my job outside, is to find other people who can talk about stuff in interviews. That's part of what a lot of us see of our role is in. So there's a transport select committee, which I got in touch with recently. I'm not sitting on it, I'm not involved in it, I wasn't called to give evidence, but I got in touch and said, have you thought about inviting these people to speak to the select committee? So that's so what you spend a lot of time doing is just trying to join stuff up. Because for me, like the network, that's the important bit, is getting those different voices. I'm not an expert in transport, but I know lots of people who are. Here's
a tough question. How do you stay awake during the debates in the Lodge?
They're all really exciting, so it's very easy.
No, I've watched a few.
I'll be really honest, there are a few times. So if you're in a debate, you've got to be in for all of it. So there have been times where I've been in the chamber 12 hours. And that is hard going. And literally, I've had a colleague wait outside with a cup of tea till it's virtually cold. I run out, drink it, and then go back in again. So some of it's hard. I've never fallen asleep.
Come on, be honest.
No, genuinely, because if you're in a debate, then it's something you're interested in. So there's definitely been times where I've been so tired, it's hard to think straight. And we had, there were lots of votes, late night votes on Brexit and stuff like that. So at one point with some of the Brexit legislation, we could have been in the chamber for 3 days continuously. And
so you didn't even go to bed?
Well, we weren't in the end because people saw sense and saw not to be daft and trying to delay things, because they were delayed. There was filibustering going on, and everyone kind of grew up and went, okay, this is daft. Because also we've got some like older peers who I don't want a peer who's amazing, and actually I might not agree with politically, but I don't want them sleeping on the floor of their office when they're 93. Come on, guys. So no, when you're in it, it's normally okay. But I have had times where I've been in the building at 2-3 in the morning, and it is just, but you're there and you're staying there because there may be a vote that you absolutely have to be there for. So some of it's hard, but yeah.
And is it a good place to work in terms of, do they make reasonable adjustments for you? Like, say, like if you have to go out of the chamber and nobody else is allowed because you're a disabled person, do you get is there any not special treatment, but any reasonable adjustments that they make that they should make?
Well, so the building, I think there's two bits. As a pass holder, I can get to every single part of the building I need to get to, not always by the most direct route, but I can get there. And they have been really amazing in terms of asked for a ramp in one part of the building that would cut down quite a lot how far I had to walk every day. And somebody said to me, quite difficult, listed building, we may be able to put a temporary ramp in. And about a week later, this concrete ramp appears. And I was like, I thought you said it could only be temporary. And they went, this is House of Lords. Yeah, it might last 50 years, but that is temporary for the House of Lords. So there is a House of Lords queue. And it's a bit odd. It's not real, Will Fellow. Really not real. I think as a visitor coming in, it's harder because you don't have the same back of house access that we have, and you don't get to know the routes. And there's a lot of places as a visitor you have to be escorted. So there's that. I would say, so in terms of reasonable adjustment, so, Jane Campbell, she's now on a ventilator. It's quite hard for her to read out her speeches. So she has been allowed to take someone who's not a peer into the chamber. So when she starts running out of air, they read a speech until she gets her voice back. So there's more that's needed. We've got a number of deaf peers who need reasonable adjustment. We need to look at that. And so, there's always more that could be done. And there's a group of us that to be fair, we can't actually agree on the name of our group, but we're a bunch of disabled peers who talk about disability issues. Yeah. And so we're kind of there to say, hang on a minute, right, let's start having a bit more of a think. But I think it's probably the most accessible building I've ever worked in. And I've quite recently changed offices to put me somewhere a bit closer to an accessible toilet, which is really nice as I get older. And it's a bit easier for me to get to. And so I've always found them personally quite open to having those discussions over the things that affect me. It's much harder as a, so I mean, it's one of the things. So we've got our own entrance, and it's a revolving door, and it's the oldest revolving door in London. And I can fit in it, but they've done something to it so they can open the doors so somebody with a bigger chair can get in. And is that ideal? But you're not sending somebody, round the back entrance. So some of it's not perfect, but I think they listen. Yeah.
And because you've been in the Lord for over 10 years, what do you think? What do you think's happened to disabled rights over the 10 years? From your vantage point, what would you say?
I don't think I've achieved very much, if I'm being honest. I think
no, but it's not you, is it? But
no. But if you look at, I think in the last 10 years, lives of disabled people have got harder.
Yeah.
And worse, and there's more.
And is it all your fault?
No. Yeah, some do. No, I mean, I'm not. So I suppose that's, for me, what's important is having the resilience to keep having a go and keep fighting for stuff to try and change it, and not shut up and sit back and go, well, okay, I haven't, because the reality is most of the stuff that I work on, my amendments in welfare reform, there were 3-line whips against me. It's hard to beat a 3-line whip, and so I think it's about having the resilience. And actually, what was really good, I've got a load of disabled friends who are amazing, who, when times are hard and when stuff's not going as you maybe want it, will just kind of go, it'll either be a bit of a hug, or shut up and carry on, or pull yourself together, and it's that's really helpful. But I think in the wider world, there's a really interesting video that someone, Caroline Casey's done, and linked to her organisation called the Valuable 500. It's about diversity and inclusion, and it's a real mick take of a video, and it's an employer with a disabled person next to them, where they're saying, basically speaking for the disabled, but all the sort of the stereotype, we know that happens. And there's one bit of that which is like, we're going to do disability like the year after next. And that's where I think we kind of are at the minute, which is just, it's not easy to fix. It's not to change disability access rights things. It takes a massive personal commitment from loads of people. It's not just sticking a wheelchair user in a photo or putting a badge on, or a company saying we're disability confident, because what actually does that change? But I think some of the politics we're in at the minute, which does worry me, is that if I stick a badge on to say I care about you, that's all I have to do. But for the disabled person, it doesn't change a thing. So, stop it.
Yeah.
All the people who think wearing a badge changes stuff, stop it right now.
Yeah, that's very true. Is there anything you'd like to ask Pete before we wrap up?
I mean, I think there's an interesting discussion around kind of your last point, because I think that there's like two very different kind of disability debates. There's the one I think that is kind of far more kind of financial, and you're talking about benefits, and you're talking about basically talking about council funding. Like that's the short answer to all of them. And in that sense, like, funding has definitely gone down. I think it's a lot more complicated picture when you kind of look at things that are not that. And honestly, it's a difficult conversation, because honestly, like, those things are unbelievably important. Like those things are life and death for many, many, many people.
Yeah.
But then there's lots of other things. There's other laws. Autism is one topic that you could put in this category. Honestly, you could say a lot about education. You could say a lot about universities and various things. But yeah, I mean, so kind of, would you broadly agree with that? Is that kind of like?
Yeah, because actually most of what I've talked about today is the welfare, the benefit side. That there's the unemployment gap, there's the education gap, there's access to physical activity for disabled people, which pre-pandemic was twice the national, which was closing, but the pandemic's blown it wide open. It's like every bit. So, you know, somebody said to me the other day, what's the one thing you do? And it's like, well, I can't give you one thing, you know. So what I say, you know, there's transport is like every single bit of our lives needs something doing it to it, you know. Actually, if we could get, you know, every company to employ 15 to 18% disabled people, that would, because then you'd see more disabled people and they wouldn't be frightened of it. And but you know, there's lots of bits of research in places, you know, which is, you know, I've never spoken to a disabled person, so I don't know what to say. Okay, does that move on to actually get companies to employ more disabled people? So no. So, you know, it's the stuff with transport. I mean, I use humour's usually the way that I personally manage to keep going, because otherwise I'd just scream and get really frustrated. But when I'm talking to different or new people about transport, I say to them, I just want the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else.
Yeah.
And I don't have that. I don't have the same miserable experience of commuting that my sister has. That's my really. And then when you put it like that, you know, that is my aspiration. Oh, and so it's finding a way to unlock these bits. And
one of my favourite recent mottos that came, I think, out of Oxford University. They were arguing for accessibility in the university, and kind of there was one particular site that says, to boldly go where everyone else has gone before.
Oh, that's a good one.
Somewhat love, but yeah.
Tanni, is there anything you would like to say before we close? Because
just thank you for letting me have a bit of a rant. It's been quite cathartic. And
you could come on again sometime.
Thank you. I would love to. And no, it's just been good because we need to talk about these things and get it out there. Anyway, yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you
very much for coming on. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.